Thank you very much. We are about to start. If you could all take your seats and maybe turn off your phones, or at least on silent. I will do the same, and then we will get ready to go. Okay, we will also have an opportunity to do this at the end as well, if that's easier. We might just get going now. Okay. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll have seen the media release that was issued by WADA earlier on today in relation to the decision taken today in Lausanne by the WADA Executive Committee to unanimously approve the recommendation by the Compliance Review Committee in relation to the compliance procedure against WADA. We'll be very happy to answer your questions here at this press conference. I'll just introduce you. On my immediate right is the Chair of the Compliance Review Committee, Jonathan Taylor QC. Then is the WADA Director General, Olivier Nigli. In the middle is WADA's President, Sir Craig Reedy, and to his right is the WADA President-elect, who will start his term of office on the 1st of January, Witold Banka. And then at the end we have the Director of our Intelligence and Investigations Department, Gunther Junger. So you don't want to hear from me, I'm sure, so I'll pass straight over to President Sir Craig Reedy to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today, the World Anti-Doping Agency's Executive Committee unanimously endorsed the recommendation made by our Independent Compliance Review Committee that the Russian Anti-Doping Agency be declared non-compliant with the World Anti-Doping Code for a period of 4 years. The CRC recommendation, which was derived from the reports of WADA's intelligence and investigations and external forensic experts, concluded that the Moscow data was intentionally altered prior to and while it was being forensically copied by WADA in January 2018. Therefore, the RUSADA reinstatement conditions, which were agreed by the WADA Executive Committee in September 2018, were not fulfilled, in that the Moscow data was neither complete nor authentic. Along with the recommendation, the Executive Committee endorsed a series of strong consequences and conditions of reinstatement in accordance with WADA's International Standard for Code Compliance by Signatories, the ISCCS, which took effect in April 2018. The consequences include the banning of Russia from the Olympics, Paralympics and World Championships run by all code signatories for 4 years, and the banning of Russia hosting any of these major events within that time frame. This is a ban against Russia that protects the rights of Russian athletes by allowing re-entry for major events to those that are able to demonstrate that they are not implicated in any way by the non-compliance. The decision is designed to punish the guilty parties and send the message that it will not be tolerated. It stands strong against those who cheated the system while protecting those who did not. Today's outcome is thanks to the agency's robust investigatory capability, the vision of the Compliance Review Committee and WADA's recently acquired ability to recommend meaningful sanctions via the compliance standard, which was not available the last time RUSADA was declared non-compliant. These strengths combined have enabled the Executive Committee to make the right decision at the right time. For too long, Russian doping has detracted from clean sport. The blatant breach by the Russian authorities of RUSADA's reinstatement conditions, approved by the Executive Committee in September 2018, demanded a robust response. Russia was afforded every opportunity to get its house in order and to rejoin the global anti-doping community for the good of its athletes and for the integrity of sport, but it chose instead a different route. WADA will now send a formal notice to RUSADA asserting non-compliance with the requirement to provide an authentic copy of the Moscow data and proposing the consequences to come into effect on the date on which the decision that RUSADA is non-compliant becomes final and to remain in effect until the 4th anniversary of that date. RUSADA has 21 days to accept this decision, or else it will appear before the Court of Arbitration for Sport, at which point WADA will have to justify this assertion of non-compliance. On behalf of the Executive Committee and of the many stakeholders that supported the CRC recommendation, I would like to thank the members of the CRC for their expert and considered recommendation, as well as WADA's Intelligence and Investigations Department and the forensic experts for their skill, their diligence and perseverance in getting to the bottom of a highly complex case. I'll stop there, James.
Okay, thank you very much, Sir Craig. President-elect Banca, I call upon you also to say a few words.
Okay. Thank you, James. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to make a short statement. Just briefly, first of all, I would like to thank Ginter, Jonathan and whole Intelligence and Investigations WADA team and as well as Compliance Review Committee for their exceptional and tremendous work. Thank you very much for your efforts. I would like to highlight that today's decision is very important for the future of anti-doping system and also will strengthen the credibility of WADA. It is very important that those recommendations were approved by all the EXCO members, and it's also worth mentioning that previously this decision was consulted in different regions. A couple of days ago in Europe we had a Kahama meeting where all European countries, members of Council of Europe, of course except Russia, supported those recommendations. Overall, having anonymous decision today is a good sign for the future of anti-doping. What is important in today's decision is that we are really sanctioning those who are responsible for these manipulations and leave doors open for those who had nothing to do with doping scandal in Russia, clean, innocent athletes. And as I want to remind you, one of the most important objectives of WADA is to protect clean athletes. But the work is not done yet, of course. We need to focus on the implementation of CRC recommendations, absolutely crucial for us, taking into account the next steps. So, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Banca. I'll now like to open it up to questions. As I said in my briefing a little while ago, please raise your hand and wait for a microphone to come to you. Let us know who you are and where you're from, and then ask your question. First question from David.
Thank you, James. David Owen from Inside the Games. It's a question for Jonathan and possibly Gunter. if I can read it, you said in the WADA press release, Jonathan, that WADA now has the names of all suspicious athletes in the LIMS database thanks to the painstakingly forensic nature of the investigation that includes the athletes whose data was manipulated or even deleted, including the 145 athletes within WADA's target group of most suspicious athletes. Does that mean that if this process confirms the decision of today, that you will be able to keep those 145 athletes out of the Olympic Games and Paralympic Games? And will you at some point be able to name them so that people like us will be able to check that they're kept out? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, David. The answer to your question is yes, we do know who those athletes are, the 145 and any further athletes, and therefore they will be kept out of the Games if they're still competing. Remember that the LIMS data relates to testing done in 2012 to 2015. So it may or may not be that they're still competing, but if they are, then that will be a block to them using the mechanism provided for to participate in the Games. As to whether or not their names will be made public moving forward, that will depend. It's not something we've specifically focused on. It will depend on due process. It will depend upon whether or not further evidence can be obtained and proceedings can be brought against them. On the first point, you can be sure that they will not participate in the events. On the second point, I think we'll have to watch and wait on that one.
Tarek?
Tarek Pandra from the New York Times. I'm not sure who the best placed person is, but in 2018, before Pyeongchang, we had the Schmidt report and all of that, and very strong sanctions. It was a day like today, and Russia were banned from the Olympics. And then we were all at the Olympics, and it was Russia in all but name, the Olympic team from Russia or whatever they were called. There were hundreds of Russian athletes there. What are we going to see here? We're going to see, you said they're banned from international sports, Olympics and World Championships. Are we going to see the football team formerly known as Russia at the World Cup? Are we going to see the formerly known Russian team in hockey? The teeth of this ban, what does that actually mean? Or is it just something we're going to write today and then we're going to see hundreds of athletes? Thanks.
Jonathan, do you want to take that one?
Thank you. It's a fair question. First of all, let's be clear about the totality of the package. This is a 4-year package. It relates to a number of different things. I'll come to participation in events in a moment, but hosting of events for 4 years, plus bidding for events in the next 4 years, which means there won't be events in Russia for longer than 4 years. In terms of participation, the standard is clear. There will be no flag at the events that are covered. We could talk about the events that are covered. Goes down to World Championships in each sport. There will not be a Russian flag, and the athletes will not be participating as representatives of Russia. The details from sport to sport will have to differ because some are team sports, some are individual sports. There are going to have to be a case-by-case basis. Nevertheless, what is important to note is that the standard says that it is under the control and or the approval of WADA to ensure appropriate and standardised enforcement. That may, if there is a CAS case, be taken then to CAS so it can see what is proposed and endorse it itself. So, can we be definitive now as to in every case what it will mean? No, but the standard is clear. They will not be there as representatives of Russia. What that means in every case will need to be developed and will need to be subject of guidelines that the CAS will have to look at and or the WADA EXCO. If we don't go to CAS, the WADA EXCO will have to look at.
Okay, thank you. There's a question right up at the front. Thank you.
Hello, it's Elizabeth Isakov from Russian news agency RIA Novosti. I have a couple of questions, short ones. First, do you have any roadmap for RUSADA on how to restore its credibility for WADA? And the next one is, in case of the dispute of RUSADA, do you expect the decision of CAS will be different from your decision? And maybe just one small question. Will you accept Russian athletes to perform as an Olympic athletes from Russia team that was, for example, in previous games?
I think that one's for you too, Jonathan.
Is there a roadmap for RUSADA to restore credibility? Well, first of all, let me be clear, and it's in the recommendation as well. The standard which Craig referred to, which was put in place in 2018, tries to deal with these circumstances and anticipate circumstances such as this, where in fact the NADO, which is non-compliant, is able to show that its anti-doping activities remain credible and reliable. And that is the judgment of WADA at the moment, based on audits that have been done of the anti-doping operations of RUSADA, plus reports back from international federations like the Athletics Integrity Unit, who you'll have seen recently in their press release about the Lysenko case, thanked RUSADA for its cooperation. And the standard allows for that by saying that RUSADA, despite being non-compliant, can be allowed to continue to conduct its activities. However, one of the conditions of reinstatement, the conditions that will have to be met in order for there to be reinstatement after 4 years, is that RUSADA is able to confirm that it remains independent and operating properly in accordance with the code and standard and without improper outside interference. And if it is not able to do that, then a reinstatement condition will not have been met. Do I expect the decision of CAS to be different from the decision of the WADA Exco today? No, I don't. And will Russian athletes be accepted as Olympic athletes from Russia? No, they are neutral athletes, which means not representatives of any country, not representatives of Russia.
Okay, Jonathan, about halfway down.
Hi, Jonathan Crane from Deutsche Welle. A couple of questions, one to Craig Reedy, one to Jonathan. Craig, the decision obviously seems in some ways similar to what's been decided before, so a lot of people are saying, well, what actually has changed? So what has changed in this last period? And Jonathan, how confident are you of winning the case at CAS?
Well, I think the second question's been answered, but first question.
What has changed is that from April 2018 we have a completely new compliance set of rules which empowers us to take much stronger action, and that is precisely what has been done today. And you've had Jonathan's view, legal view, that the case at CAS is strong and may well be accepted.
Okay, Hayo.
Thank you, James. Two questions. The first question is, the IOC has asked for the delivery of the authentic database. They asked after this weekend, so far as I remember, this was exact wording. First of all, is that authentic database still existing, or do you believe that it is destroyed from the Russians? Second question is, would that authentic data now help you in order to expose more doping cases in the current situation? And the other question is referred to biathlon. There are people in biathlon who claim that the World Championships are concerned, but the World Cup is not concerned. Can you give us an understanding if that is correct interpretation, or does it refer really to all, let's say, global events?
Okay, well, I think Gunter would be best placed to answer the first two questions, and maybe Jonathan the third.
Thank you, Hayo, for the question. Regarding the authentic data, we have to go back when we discussed with Russia what we want. And actually, the objective of our task was to get the raw data, because these are the primary evidence for all the cases. And our lab experts, they needed some more information from the raw data that we haven't had in our database. So this was the first task. When we went there and extracted the data, we realized that data were deleted, raw data were deleted, so we could not extract those data that we needed for our cases. So when we talk about the authentic data, we don't know where they are, but perhaps they have still some from the raw data, but if they have the raw data, they should hand over them, and then we can check. We have enough evidence to be sure whether the raw data are authentic or not. So if we get the raw data, then we are able to proceed the cases that are still pending. At the moment, we don't have them. The second question was more or less the same like I just said, that the raw data are the most important thing, because they have some more information that the database has, and therefore we are keen on getting these ones. But so far we haven't received those. So what we know is that there are a majority of raw data have been deleted since 2016. Yeah.
Okay, Jonathan.
In relation to biathlon, the standard talks about and the decision talks about world championships. And it depends, each sport is different as to how it defines its world champion. My understanding in biathlon is there are World Cups, but it is the world champion, the biathlon world championship, that determines the world champion. So that's the distinction. If that's the case, it is the event that decides the world champion that is covered by the ban. So for example, in football, they have a World Cup. It is the World Cup that decides the world champion, so that is what would be covered. It is the event that determines who is the world champion.
Okay, Brian, did you have a question?
Yeah.
Brian and then Graham.
Brian Hove from Reuters. Just to clarify, can you say whether this means that Russia will or will not be able to play at the 2022 World Cup in Qatar?
Well, assuming they qualify. I don't know if they're going to qualify. If they qualify, then they can't. A team representing Russia cannot participate, but a team of neutral, if there's a mechanism put in place, then they can apply to participate on a neutral basis, not as representatives of Russia. And in a team context, how that works is going to have to be worked out on a case-by-case basis. But the answer is no Russian flag, not as representatives of Russia.
Okay, Graham?
I think you wanted to follow up.
Sorry, go ahead, Brian. Do you have a follow-up?
Would the decision be down to FIFA or down to WADA?
The signatory in each case has to implement the decision. And in terms of if they want to put in place a mechanism to allow this mechanism for athletes who can prove they're not tainted, they can do that. WADA has to either control or approve that mechanism. So they're going to have to work together. But what is very clear, it's one of the new things that the new standard brings in, is that once this is a final decision, everyone is bound by it, everyone has to implement it. So it will be for the IF, here FIFA, to implement, but they'll have to do so in consultation with WADA, which will be making sure that there's a standardised approach and a compliant approach.
Graham.
Hi. Graham Dunbar from the Associated Press. Another question for Jonathan. In terms of hosting, if you looked at which events in the next 4 years are the most prestigious or the most watched, then you're looking at things like the Champions League final, Formula One Grand Prix, Sportacore Conference, all of which could be out of reach maybe of this decision today. And there's already the language built in, if legally and impractically impossible to move. And you can imagine that some of the smaller IFs in Lausanne haven't got the resources and in some cases the will for a long legal fight. What do you think are going to be the real consequences for hosting? How much is actually going to change?
I'm impressed you think the Sport Accord Conference is one of the most prestigious events. They'll be pleased with that. Look, the answer is, in the 4 years, if an event has already been awarded to Russia, then yes, the standard requires that they have put in place mechanisms that allow them, if this happens, to take that event away. There will be practical issues, and we can't ignore those. So, for example, the recommendation already says that the Youth Olympics in Lausanne in January are not covered, because even if the decision was in effect today, there wouldn't be time to implement mechanisms to implement it properly. So we have to have some flexibility. But there are a number of important events in the next 4 years, and it's not just events in the next 4 years. It's any event that comes up for bidding in the next 4 years. And it's not that they must do everything possible not to grant those events to Russia. It is that they must not grant those events to Russia. So what has changed? The rules are tougher and tighter because we learnt from some of the difficulties that were caused the first time round. As to which events, you have to get the calendar out. I'm sorry, I can't pick them out for you. But remember, it's not just those staged in the next 4 years, it's those that are bid for in the next 4 years as well. Also, the 2032 Olympic Games, they cannot bid to host that.
Eric? And then Martha.
Bonjour. Hi, Eric Bernaudot, Agence France Presse. We saw in Rio some federation deciding 3 days before the events who would take part or not. So can we expect the same thing in Tokyo? And my second question, Mrs. Helleland this morning said she was not happy with this decision today, and the worst decision was to reinstate RUSADA in 2018. Craig Reedy or Mr. Nigley, what do you reply to this? Thank you.
The first point. It would not work for team selection entry to be done 3 days before the Games. If RUSADA accepts the consequences, they will come into effect immediately. If it doesn't, there will be a CAS case. The standard allows for expedited proceedings, and therefore we push through the case and hope to get a decision by March or April. Can't control that, so we don't know. But everyone does know that if it comes into effect, they need to be ready to implement it. They are required to implement it as a matter of their own compliance, and there will be a mechanism, guidance put out by WADA, which either has been, if we've gone to CAS, will have been reviewed and endorsed by CAS, so that they will be ready to implement those sanctions.
Okay, Craig.
Yeah, and as far as the Vice President is concerned, I actually haven't seen exactly what she said, but if she said the September decision 2018 was wrong, then I don't understand that, because the Compliance Review Committee made a submission to the Executive Committee, of which she was a full member, and she signed off on that. That Executive Committee offer was put to the Russian authorities. They responded. She signed off on that, and then she may have changed her mind. She seems to have forgotten that the rules have changed and had changed before the September meeting. The whole point of the September decision was, first of all, an admission of liability, which came through the IOC Schmidt Commission, and secondly, access to the data in the Moscow laboratory. Without access to that data, we would not have been able to bring cases against athletes who have cheated, and perhaps just as significantly, we would not have been able to exonerate athletes with samples in the laboratory who had not cheated. So I'm sorry, I simply don't understand what she said. And at the end of the day, however, she unanimously accepted and approved the EXCO decision this morning.
Okay, Martha, and then there's a question right at the back.
Martha Kellner from Sky News. I'm not sure who's the right person to direct this question to, but were you surprised to see such critical anti-doping data deleted by the Russians, even after they'd promised to be compliant?
Who wants that one? Craig?
The answer is yes. Surprised. I mean, why would we place an offer before the Russian authorities to break the deadlock that existed between WADA and Russia? The assumption was that we were waiting entirely for Russia to accept the McLaren report. 26 cases prosecuted by the IOC from Pyeongchang were overturned at the Court of Arbitration for Sport. So the chances of sitting waiting for Russia to change their mind seem to me to be unlikely. In which case, if you're going to break the data, the importance was to get into the laboratory. Having agreed that all of that should happen, and having agreed to assist the entry of our experts to the laboratory, to then find out that at almost the same time they were tampering with the data, disappointment is maybe not quite the right word, but disappointment will do for the moment.
Jonathan, did you want to follow up on that?
If I may, so just follow up on Sir Craig's comments there. Disappointed, yes. We gave them an opportunity. That was the decision in the Seychelles, to give them an opportunity to draw a line. We knew there was a possibility they would not do so, and that's why two things happened. One, reinstated, subject to them to providing the data, which means that the new rules applied. And that's why we are where we are today. The new rules apply, and that's why we can impose these consequences. But secondly, and just as importantly, when Gunter's team went into the Moscow lab, they didn't take images of the data, they took forensic copies of the data, which meant they were able to go behind into the properties of each file and see what had happened, because they're not stupid, they were prepared for this possibility. And it's a good moment to pay tribute to the skill of the Intelligence and Investigations Department and the independent experts, because they hoped for the best but planned for the worst and were able to expose some very significant tampering. And by doing so in the context of a reinstated RUSADA, they were able to do so in a context where we're now able to impose some significant consequences which everyone has to recognise and enforce.
Okay, right at the back.
Hello, thank you. Charlotte Dubinsky from Russia Today. You've talked today about the fact that you know who the suspicious athletes are, 145. You've talked about this decision as being one that will protect the innocent. But does it, when many people would say it's unfair for those athletes who have no cloud of suspicion over them to not be able to compete under the Team Russia banner, to not be able to compete and to potentially win, to have their flag shown if they win at any of these events? People who've worked and trained for years to be able to do that. And secondly, what impact do you think this will have on young athletes who are just starting their journey to come through the ranks, who are looking at potentially having a career in athletics or in sports, that this ban could do to them?
Gunter?
Perhaps I can start with the answer. I fully agree with you that innocent athletes should be protected. And actually, what I just said to Hayo, the whole exercise of going to Moscow to get the data was to exonerate the clean athletes and to get those that had cheated or were protected by the system. So we reached out to our Russian colleagues and say, please provide us the data and we can finish that case. What we then saw was that data were deleted and raw data were deleted, so we could not anymore finish our cases. So therefore, it is almost impossible now to really go to every case and to find out whether this athlete was innocent or not. And I think this was Russians' fault and not our fault. And therefore, we are really disappointed about that point. Nevertheless, we want to make sure that that the clean athletes are protected, and therefore, from our point of view, the neutral athletes is a good way of exonerate those that were not part of the cheats and were not part of any deletions. And therefore, from our point of view, it's a good decision.
Okay, thank you. Alex, you had a question, and then Halvor behind you.
Alex Campsey, BBC. Jonathan, surely the most robust punishment would have been a blanket ban. I just wondered how close, or if you discussed that in your when you were working out what to do with Russia, how close you came to implementing a blanket ban, and why in the end you chose not to.
Yes, thanks for the question. Yes, it's absolutely part of the standard. It's a possibility under the standard, as is the possibility to have the neutral athlete mechanism. So there was a choice between a blanket ban and a partial ban. And you've heard already the argument that says, well, even a partial ban and neutral athletes is unfair on those athletes. And we hear an argument that it's too soft, it's too weak. So reasonable people can disagree with this. I completely understand that. From a CRC point of view, we discussed it very specifically. And the strongest person on that subject was Penny Haynes, former Olympic gold medalist, world record holder, who was very strong on the idea that athletes who are in a new generation, who are not competing in 2012 to 2015, have nothing to do either with the underlying doping scandal or with this cover-up in 2018-19, should have an opportunity to compete. I personally don't think, in answer to the previous question, there's anything unfair about making them do so not under a Russian flag. Russia's forfeited its right to compete with its flag at the major games. You can argue, is it enough? Should there be a blanket ban in order to force change? We have to hope that there will be change in response to what I think are a serious set of consequences. But on that specific issue, it was the athlete's voice that was the strongest on the CRC, and she took everyone with her. It's unanimous on that point, and that's why we took it to the EXCO on that basis, and are pleased to get unanimous support from them.
Okay, thank you, Halvor. And then there's a couple of questions here.
Yeah. I have a question for Mr. Banker and Sir Craig. Jonathan mentioned that you can argue, is it enough with this kind of sanctions? I'd like to ask you guys, is it enough, or would you rather have a blanket ban?
As president of the organisation, as chairman of the executive committee, we have to rely entirely on the processes that we have put in place. If we have an expert compliance review committee which comes with a detailed, you will see it's now available to you, the whole 26 pages. You will see the work that has been done. You will see the reasons for their suggestion on sanctions, and I am perfectly happy that we have operated as far as our process is concerned. I'm rather encouraged to hear the news today that the current balance of sanctions was hugely supported by a very well-known international athlete, and I'm comfortable with that news.
And Mr. Banka, as a former elite-level athlete?
I would like to underline that I couldn't agree more with the President.
Okay, questions here in the second row and the third row.
Thank you. Hiroki Tora from Asahi Shimbun of Japan. Question to President Reedy. A few days ago, there was an Olympic summit, and I believe you made some explanation to the IOC and the other organization. What kind of explanations did you make, and did everybody was on board with all the package that the CRC recommended today? Thank you.
I was invited to attend the Olympic Summit towards the end of the agenda. I was asked to report on current activities from WADA, which in the main consisted of the reports from the Sixth World Conference on Doping in Sport in Katowice in Poland, on some additional work that we had been doing with the developments of the ADAMS system. And when it got round to, and they actually were kind enough to say, could I think of any highlights over the last 6 years as president of the organisation? And when it came to questions and points made, everybody in the room said that they supported the balance of, if I could put it this way, the balance of sanctions that have been opposed. That they were very keen that there should be firm action taken against those who have broken the rules, and there should be protection for those who clearly have not. So to that extent, I then left the summit. But it would be fair to say that you can work it out yourself. If there's a unanimous decision this morning, then the sports movement was unanimously in favour of it.
Okay, question there.
Masashi Inoue from Kyodo News, a Japanese news agency. So today, WADA made a decision that Russia cannot use national flag for 4 years period. And what happened to national anthem? Do they Russians still can sing sing national song, national anthem at Olympic Games or Paralympic Games? Thank you.
I will pass that question to my left, to Jonathan, but the international standard mentions flags. I don't think it mentions anthems, John. Is that correct?
It doesn't mention anthems. It will be to be developed in the guidelines. However, the message is that the team that goes there is not a representative of Russia. So as part of that, if you ask me, you would say that that also addresses anthems, but that's to be decided in the guidelines. The point about the consequences proposed is to send a message that Russia has forfeited its place at those games.
Okay, there's a question, but he's been waiting a while.
Yes, thank you. Jonathan already told about the roadmap, so Russia could return in 4 years. But just to make it clear, could it be some kind of early release of the Russian ban? Can it be aborted in about 2 or 3 years? And what can be considered the iron proof of the changes in Russia, so it could return to big sports events? My name is Evgeny Zagitov from Match TV channel. Thank you, Russian.
At the back of the recommendation, which you all will have now, there are a series of reinstatement conditions that have to be complied with. I've mentioned the RUSADA condition. Another one is that international federations be allowed to continue testing and investigating without interference. There are also several conditions that relate to supporting and cooperating the ongoing investigation of the previous cases which are reported in the 2015 LIMS. And that includes both providing more paperwork, interviews, evidentiary support. It also says rectifying the tampering with the data that has happened already, and that was referred to earlier. So if the raw data is produced and it is completely rectified, the position, so that those cases can be brought, then yes, there can be a reconsideration of the length of the consequences. I have to say, there have been plenty of opportunities given to provide that data, and it hasn't shown up yet.
Okay, last couple of questions then, right at the front. And then... Yeah.
Hello, Artem Kuznetsov, TASS News Agency. Thank you for this opportunity. I have 4 questions. First of all, I'd like to ask you about 145 athletes. You just mentioned that you know their names. So could you clarify how many of them still compete? I mean, still active athletes? Half of them? 1/3 of them? I don't know. The second question, are you sure that CAS will make decision before the Olympics in Tokyo if RUSADA will disagree with you? The third one, do you expect that some international federations will appeal against your decision? And the fourth one, what about Russian supporters, Russian fans? Will they have a chance to attend the events with Russian flags and other national signs? Thank you.
I think maybe the first one for Gunter.
So thank you for the question. So of the 145, we estimate, because we have to look closely each athlete by athlete, whether they still compete, but we guess around 1/3 are still active.
Okay, Jonathan.
Your second question was, am I sure that the CAS will make its decision before Tokyo? No, I can't be sure. The standard says it has to be an expedited proceeding. One possibility is that it is dragged out deliberately or otherwise so that it doesn't cover Tokyo. If that happens, then because it is a rolling 4-year period that starts when the decision becomes final, it will cover Paris instead. So it will be up to the Russians to decide which they want to have covered, Tokyo or Paris. Will IFs appeal against the decision? Well, first of all, if RUSADA disputes it, then WADA takes it to CAS. IFs, others affected by the decision, can intervene. If RUSADA accepts the decision, it becomes final, but as you say, IFs and others affected by the decision can appeal the decision. Will they? I've got no idea. It's up to them to decide whether the impact on them is something that they think that they should or shouldn't challenge. Let's remember, though, the international standard was agreed unanimously just in 2018, and that decision by IFs to say we will not grant our events to countries that are non-compliant is part of their commitment to the solidarity of the anti-doping movement. Having made that commitment, I wouldn't expect them to resolve from it now.
Okay, last question. Thank you. Fans bringing...
whether or not they can bring colours and flags into the event, that hasn't been considered. It's going to have to be decided as part of the same guidelines that I talked to you about, which will be developed either by the EXCO if it doesn't go to CAS, or it will have to be put to CAS and decided at CAS.
Okay, thank you. Last question.
Christoph Becker, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. This goes back to what Graham asked earlier. It's going to Jonathan. It's basically, the question is there a clear-cut definition of what constitutes a major event under these sanctions? And if so, which one is it? And to use the most easygoing example, I guess, why is the Euro 2020 Football Championship not a major event? Is that because UEFA is not a signatory to the WADA Code? And regarding the 2022 Soccer World Cup, am I correct in assuming that the Russian national football team would be playing the qualification matches under UEFA's guidance as Russia, and then if they qualify, then they would turn into a neutral team?
Okay, in terms of the definition of major event, if you look at paragraph 54 of the recommendation, it covers that major event was a shortcut in the press release. What are covered are the Youth Olympic Games, summer and winter, the Olympic Games and Paralympic Games, summer and winter, any other event organised by a major event organisation, so for example the European Olympic Games, and any World Championships organised or sanctioned by any signatory. That's what it says in the standard is the starting point, and it was decided to stick with that, not go beneath it to European Championships, which is why the Euros aren't covered, but to cover the event that covers the world, that determines the world champion. In football, the World Cup determines the world champion. The qualifying events don't determine it, so they're not covered. The final tournament does cover it, so it is covered. Does determine the champion, and so it is covered.
Okay, thank you very much. And as I said in my briefing before, we will now have a huddle with the Russian TV media, primarily up here with Sir Craig and then Gunter Junger. So those who are interested in that, please come up here. If you had one-on-ones arranged in advance and approved in advance, please come over to where I'm pointing here and we'll arrange that with you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Hi.
Shane from China.
Hi, Shane, how are you?
Thanks for registering for the last minute.